And I
Yes.
Was that a yes?
Yes.
I can see it.
Yes.
Great. Okay, thank you. Well, we welcome everyone and thank you for being at our presentation. We have jammed a lot into this short amount of time, so we're going to try to move through it at an efficient pace and leave some time for questions at the end. And so without further ado, let's get started. So as many of you do know me, I'm Dr. Kristy Eldredge, and of course I am one of your core faculty in the CMHC program, but I also do work in a private practice out here in Denver, Colorado, where I specialize in survivors, specifically adult survivors of complex trauma, also supervising counselors who work with complex trauma. And I'll let Jesaira introduce herself as well.
Well, my resume isn't as lofty, so I am Jesaira Glover, and I'm an alumni actually of this program. It's actually been almost a year that I've graduated from the program. I'm working currently with adults 18 plus with mood and thought disorders, and I am also an adjunct with Chicago School in the Bachelor's of Psychology program, and I'm glad to be here.
So Jesaira and I were both, we've been working on this topic and presented at another conference a couple weeks ago on this, and we were both talking with each other about, why and how did we find ourselves at this particular topic of human trafficking? And for me, it really came from, I was working with complex trauma survivors and specializing in dissociative disorders. And a lot of those come out of early childhood sexual abuse. But what I was noticing is that my clients were coming in and reporting that part of their history had included trafficking. And for me at the beginning, I really realized that I didn't know much about it at all. And so I needed to do the research just to make sure I was doing competent counseling, and then found myself doing more and more research and presentations. And now this is a really big passion area for me.
So I kind of stumbled into this particular topic as well. For several years, I had been performing, and during a performance rehearsal, I was having a conversation with a minor actor. She happened to be 16 years old, and she began to share her story about being trafficked, and she was in DC, and she was an African-American teenager, and it really, really floored me. Fast forward, as I was matriculating through the program, through the CMHC program, I was taking a course with Dr. E, the traumatic stress course, I believe the CM599, it might still be that, I'm not sure. Mm-hmm. And I really was drawn to this subject matter. I didn't know much about it at all, and I think I was really intrigued by this whole notion of human slavery and how it still exists today, and the fact that it was a billion-dollar industry. And I wanted to know more about it and what I could do as a mental health professional to help.
So we're going to be talking about some case examples, about some concepts, and before we get into any of that, we do just want to give you a caution that a lot of the material we'll be talking about is upsetting and triggering, and so we will take no offense if you feel like you need to leave the session, and really invite you to be using your coping skills, your grounding skills throughout the presentation, and then to reach out for support afterwards from your support systems, including us.
Then it can't go near the fire.
And it sounds like maybe we can hear someone in the background. But we're going to do a quick glimpse. And I don't know, Jesaira, did you want to introduce this while I'm pulling it up?
Sure. This is a clip that I actually incorporated in actually in the paper that I submitted to Dr. E on human trafficking. And I thought it was a great way to start the conversation, because this is a real life, it's Jades story. And I think that it really, really will help to kind of put legs and feet and kind of really help to really see how real this issue is and how it's a growing problem in this country and all over the world. Yeah, no, you're fine. You can hit.
And we're just going to do like a minute or two of this. And
I went to my school. Somewhere to stay. I was like, where else am I going to go? Like, I don't have anywhere else. And there was about it was very nice to meet now, and we'd go to the movie, and he came up and asked me, I'm sitting on the couch, but we're gonna go out for a little bit. This motel, a girl into this motel. This guy and their exchange and they're starting to click in my head. That's why you were nice watching her. She took down for the blank face, as if it's something normal. After everything's finished, Joker sits down and tells me, I'm not asking you to do it, but I'm asking every appointment that we go on. I don't want you living here just for, like, this will be your way, pay me back. And I did. For the next 2 months, I sat in. Every girl had. First couple of times, but after a while, it was, you know, when you don't have anywhere else to go, you do what you have to do.
Video continues. Yeah. Sure. Sorry.
So basically, I'm not sure if you make out the video or not. I'm hearing feedback. And everybody go on mute, please. Thank you. Okay. We'll try this again. Okay. Oh, you can still hear the feedback.
Hearing feedback from us?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me put in some earbuds.
Dr. E, Dr. Stretch, you're the only ones that are not muted.
Okay.
I should be muted
Can
on my
you all
phone.
still hear me? Okay. Can y'all still hear me?
Okay.
Yes.
How about
We can
now?
hear
Oh, so the feedback.
Still feedback?
Yeah.
Getting some earbuds. Let's see if this helps.
You have to love the online environment. It's wonderful.
Can anybody hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. How's that feedback?
That's great. Awesome.
Okay. All right.
So
Sorry about that, everyone.
No problem. So in this video, it's about a young lady, a teenager who actually, her mom dies from a drug overdose, and she's living with her stepdad, and it's a bad situation. Long story short, she runs away and runs to a friend's house, and this friend has this boyfriend who is into trafficking, and that's ultimately how she ended up in that situation, being trafficked for sex eventually, not initially. So I thought that would be a great way to start our presentation.
Okay, so here is what's coming up next. So we're going to cover a couple different topics, and we're going to start with a case example. And this is honestly, it's a kind of a conglomeration of case examples from my practice as another way of protecting survivor stories, which is really important when we're doing these presentations, to protect their information, their stories, and also to not exploit them, which we'll talk about later, the importance of being aware of what can be exploitative. So for this case example, I'm going to call our client Marie. So obviously that's not her name, but Marie came came to me for, like I said, for dissociative symptoms and really struggling in her college education. And her background included having severe familial abuse within the family, and that included sexual abuse, physical abuse, neglect, psychological abuse. And then what also ended up happening within her family is that her family became her traffickers. So while she absolutely had trafficking experiences in her teens with traffickers who were not related to her, her first experiences with trafficking were actually from her biological family. And what we're starting to see, though this is an area of the research that isn't totally being explored fully yet, is that that's not uncommon for a lot of folks. So she ended up being trafficked both domestically and internationally. A lot of her experiences were being trafficked in her own home, but as well as being taken to other cities, and especially for major events like sporting events, concerts, conventions, things like that. Throughout her experience, one of the things that really kept her staying with her family, because that's a question that many survivors struggle with, is why did I stay? Or even counselors can have that question. Why did they stay? There's such a strong bond, and we'll talk about this a little bit further about the trauma bond, and also a very real fear of what will happen to both me and to my family members and to the other people that I care about if I go. So once she did get away, she then faced the hurdle of law enforcement not believing her, having to go through incredible number of re-traumatizing interviews and statements to the degree where it was not prosecuted, and then has kind of slowly found a way to reintegrate into a new life for herself, which then of course comes with a lot of extra challenges of education. Who can I trust? How do I be in a relationship? How do I make a living? And all of that stuff. So we'll be coming back and touching on both the video and some of that example when we go through some of these concepts. So let's move into just a broad overview of human trafficking. So the TVPA, this is the legislation that has defined human trafficking, and every number of years this is updated. But from the 2000 definition, and I've color coded this so that you can see the major components of the definition. So for sex trafficking, we're first looking at recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining. And so this is important because transportation does not have to be a part of this. You don't have to be moved anywhere for it to be considered trafficking. But any of those components for the purpose of a commercial sex act. So there's some kind of gain from this, whether it's financial, whether it's food, drugs, power, status, all of that is commercial gain, in which the act is induced by force, fraud, or coercion. You'll hear those three words a lot in the human trafficking language: force, fraud, or coercion. A lot of times people say, well, you didn't really have to do that. They weren't holding a gun to your head. Sometimes they are and sometimes they aren't, but there's also a very powerful force of the fraud and coercion. If you don't do this, then I'm going to kill your family, release these photos, whatever it might be, that is extremely powerful. And for sex trafficking, we also have an or here. So force, fraud, and coercion does not have to exist if the person is a minor. And that's very important, especially when we're listening to language in our media and in our communities when they're talking about child prostitutes. There is no such thing as a child prostitute. That child is being trafficked by whoever is purchasing the act or whoever is facilitating that. And then if we move down to labor trafficking, again, we've got those key elements: the recruitment, harboring, transportation, the force, fraud, and coercion. But now we're talking about for the purpose of labor or services or involuntary servitude.
So here is a map by Polaris Project from 2018 Actually, this was put out for 2018 for 2017. And if you look really closely, those red areas indicate cases, heavy cases, or a lot of cases of human trafficking. One of the things to take note of is the border states. If you'll see like the Texas, East Coast there, the border states, and then California over in that area, that's where a lot of movement is able to take place, along with the interstates, cities and states that actually have like interstates like 95, Interstate 95, 70, where a lot of this activity is actually taking place. So this is just a snapshot of the activity in the heaviest spots. The blue, there are some cases, but not as many. And so this is just a general snapshot of human trafficking across the United States.
And so often we assume or hear human trafficking and think about international human trafficking or people who are moved across international borders. But like I mentioned earlier, this is such a huge issue in the United States, not with foreign nationals, but with citizens. There's definitely an issue with foreign nationals as well, but it's also for US citizens. And again, you don't have to move anywhere for it to be trafficking. So this is one of the fastest growing criminal enterprises, along with arms trafficking. And so often those two go together. The sad part about this is for other traffickers, drug traffickers, armed traffickers, they have moved into this business because they have a never-ending supply. So with drug trafficking, you have a drug and you sell it. Then you have to get more drugs and sell those. With human trafficking, you have the human and you sell that human, and then that human still is with you and you sell them again and you sell them again. So that's one of the really disturbing aspects of this, but also one of the reasons why it's such a fast-growing enterprise. So statistics are really tough around this because when we look at, well, who's reporting, how are we tracking, how many people aren't reporting. So, take these statistics as a ballpark. Most people in the US who are trafficked are female, and most of those females are trafficked for sexual exploitation. That doesn't mean that labor trafficking isn't a huge, huge issue, especially in different regions. 50%, so about half, and I'd say give or take, the trafficked people are minors. And ages of entry for trafficking, I want to differentiate here. For trafficking that is non-familial, so that is you're being trafficked by a pimp, by someone that is outside of your family. Average age for girls being pulled into that is 12 to 14, about the same for boys. However, for familial trafficking, when your own family are the traffickers, is actually average age of 0 to 4. So really significant differences there.
Can I just add something to that? Want to add also that one of the statistics that I came across with regards to minority groups, marginalized groups, is that Black teens are 40% more likely to be trafficked, and then that falls behind 26% for Hispanic and 24% Caucasian. So we're seeing a growing trend with the marginalized and youth of color with regards to human trafficking, and specifically sex trafficking.
Thank you, Jesaira. That's really important. I won't go into all of these other numbers, but just to point out that the Trafficking in Persons report, this is an annual report that's released by the U.S. Department of State, and it looks worldwide at what are the numbers, prosecutions, convictions, and victims identified. And so, we track from year to year how are we doing globally, what countries are doing well in combating this, and what countries are needing some extra incentive support or maybe even some sanctions if they are not working towards this effort.
So who's at risk? In the video, the young lady was having issues and challenges at home. And so she became a risk, that was a risk factor in her being human trafficked And then in the case of the young lady who I spoke with, it was very interesting because I think I was very, very shocked. The young lady came from a middle-class home, single-family home, but she seemed to have a very strong connection at home. And she was trafficked by one of her so-called uncles who happened to be an actual officer at the school that she attended. And when we were talking, she began to expound upon the fact that being in a single family, that, you know, the father figure was missing. And so she would actually talk to this man often. And it actually put her right in the middle of this horrific experience. And he ended up being the one who introduced her to, and actually kind of like really manipulated her into this horrible situation and dilemma. So who is at risk? The truth of the matter is anyone. There is no specific qualifier other than these things here that we've listed, but it can be anybody. You have poverty and unemployment, homelessness, substance abusers, situational circumstances, and that can really tie into family systems where someone in the family maybe they need major surgery or is going through hardship, and then, you know, the parent decides to turn the child over to traffickers. It's just anybody could be at risk. So it's very important that as clinicians that we don't make any assumptions, but that we are very aware that this can impact anybody's life.
So these are some of the aspects that we're going to delve into a little bit more, aspects that come up in any type of trafficking. So starting with money and power, basically these are the driving forces of why people traffic other people. The main objective is for money, status, power. When we're talking about status, we can even see this in our kind of popular culture, the pimp status. In our everyday language, you can hear people saying, "Oh, that's so pimp," as a compliment of, "Wow, that's really cool." But unfortunately, what that conveys is that's cool to exploit another person. As I mentioned before, the money is so much more accessible than other criminal enterprises because you have a never-ending supply, sadly, of the people that you're selling. And if you get caught with that person who you're selling, easy to explain. It's not the same as, "Oh, you found illegal drugs in my car." It's, "Oh, no, this is my niece. This is my coworker." And sadly, again, when we talk about familial trafficking, it might indeed be their niece, their daughter, their son. And so it can be just even harder to detect and to catch.
I don't know if we mentioned that the human trafficking is one of the fastest growing criminal enterprises at this time, $1 billion industry. So there is money, unfortunately, to be made at the expense of others. Debt bondage. So this is basically where the trafficker uses the individual as collateral. It's a form of financial control. He would keep records of all of the victims' expenses, and that covers all areas of all different types of trafficking, labor trafficking, sex trafficking, and just in general. So for labor, food, shelter, transportation. The truth of the matter is these victims are, they can't pay this money back. So that's another way that these these traffickers are able to control and manipulate and hold these individuals in bondage. It says here, I want to read the last bullet where it says, expenses are grossly inflated to the point that the individual cannot pay the debt in order to regain freedom.
And we saw such a good example in the video of this when she was saying, when the guy that she was staying with was like, "Well, you didn't expect to stay here for free, did you? This is
Right.
What you owe us."
Right.
And so it's nothing is for free, even if it starts out when we talk in actually in the next slide, we'll go into the grooming and recruitment. So often this in grooming and recruitment happens anywhere, especially with the internet and social media blowing up everywhere. But often what is identified first is identifying that person and whatever their vulnerability is, starting to gain their trust, gain information about them that will be used to gain their trust, and then forming that initial attachment or dependence. So if someone is looking at, oh, you need a place to stay, I'll be a nice person, you can come and stay with us, like we saw in the video. Come on in, and we're going to spend a little bit of time forming an attachment, helping you feel safe. And then something is going to change of, actually, I need a favor. Could you, like in the video, could you just stay here and watch to make sure, that that the person is safe, or that we're getting our money, or whatever. And then that keeps escalating. So part of that flip is when the person who's being trafficked is more and more isolated from the other people in their lives, the other connections in their life, like school, family, church, community, and then starts to take control. And that's when it ultimately flips and there's the total dominance. And that is when we see some of that debt bondage showing up, saying, I've been keeping you safe all this time. I've been feeding you. I've been, getting your nails done. I've been giving you a roof over your head. This is, if you want your freedom, this is how much you're going to have to pay me. And it's an exorbitant, impossible amount.
Yeah. And that's also where the deception takes place, the manipulation as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the actual picture of the map earlier on, it really depicts how human trafficking, the movement of human trafficking, there happens to be an organization, Truckers Against Trafficking, because research indicates that a lot of the movement happens through the interstates and truck stops rather, and truckers can be a great, if they're prepared and if they know, if they're trained about human trafficking, they can be a great resource to help to minimize this, to keep this from happening. So what does this look like? Traffickers, pimps frequently move victims to different countries, cities, states, and more. But as Dr. E mentioned, sometimes when it's in the family system, there's no movement at all. That can look like going on a family vacation, and nobody would be suspicious of what is actually happening. It's important that this movement takes place because they also have to cap a range of availability of the I don't know what the proper term is for this, but the property, I'm saying property, but that's such a harsh story. Is it okay to say that, Dr. E, property, in terms of the actual individuals being trafficked?
Well, just the trafficked individuals, but I think that word is how the person feels. And that's how the trafficker sees them. It's important for us to say, like, no, they are humans. They are not property, but they are being treated as if they were. And so that movement of let's keep the income coming, let's see what other venues we can sell this person in, as if it were a commodity.
Exactly. And basic supply and demand here is what I often think about. Economics and how this here is important, that the movement, this is a way of protecting the activity as well. So,
and this is why, and this is it's a little depressing when you start to get into this field, because then you can see it everywhere. But if you look at your town and any big events that are coming that people get excited about for really positive reasons, it's going to increase our tourism. It's going to be so exciting. It's going to be so fun. The dark side of that is it's going to bring traffickers, it's going to bring trafficked individuals, and it's going to bring buyers as well. And that it's a very dark side of economics. Okay, so for neglect and abuse, got a couple of these slides because unfortunately it's just woven into the thread of trafficking. First and foremost, we know from what Jesaira was telling us that people who have abuse in their background already are extra vulnerable. So many people who are trafficked are coming out of dysfunctional or abusive homes. And then when they get into trafficking, experience neglect and abuse at another level. So one way is through health, medical neglect or abuse. So being forced to have abortions, having sexually transmitted infections, not getting the medical attention that they need, or the medical attention is provided by buyers in exchange for whatever they are buying. So an example from one source was when a young boy who was being trafficked got a knife wound that was actually inflicted by the trafficker. In order to tend to that wound, a nurse came and patched him up, but then got a sexual act in return. So that there's
Really, that's unreal.
Yeah, no escaping that. Other forms of neglect and abuse that trafficking individuals experience, kidnapping, even if that's not how the trafficking started, that movement, that being held hostage, not having freedom, being sold, witnessing other abuse, including murder, is not uncommon as well. That's often sometimes part of that coercion, that terrorizing that happens is if you don't do this, this is what's going to happen to you. And so just the psychological terror of that is overwhelming. Being betrayed from the savior, because remember in the grooming and recruitment, for many traffickers, especially non-familial trafficking, it does start with, wow, like, my family life is so dysfunctional, but here's this amazing person who understands me and who's taking me out and showing me love, and now they've betrayed me, and that betrayal trauma is there. And then, I won't read through all of the rest of these, but these are all different forms of trauma that is daily, if not hourly, part of the experience. Yeah.
So just like Dr. E stated in the grooming and recruitment, that's where the seemingly natural bond and attachment takes place. But then it's also where the betrayal begins to take place. So what you see here is distorted, relationships, and then trauma bonding. It's difficult for an individual who is being trafficked to break away from this, because there's a distorted perception about this, which was healthy. Well, I thought it was healthy, is now it's turning on me, right? So it says those relationships now, the way relationships are viewed is characterized through grooming and bullying, intimidation, abuse, violence, and control. This affection is used in a very manipulative and distorted way to draw in the victim, to get them to do exactly what they want them to do. This quote is a powerful quote here. At its core, trauma bonds can be understood as an attachment issue wrapped with worldview and identity confusion and topped off with trauma, loss, and grief. So all of this is happening as this victim, as this individual is experiencing human trafficking.
And just an example from some of my cases, what I hear from survivors is both this really visceral tug of war between I hate my trafficker, and a lot of my clients, their traffickers were their families. I hate my father, I hate my trafficker, and I love my father, my trafficker, because so often the same person who is perpetuating the abuse is the person who might then stop the abuse, or who might then, after the abuse, bring them a cup of tea. And that, it just perverts our natural attachment wiring, that, so, and they know that. And so it's
how do I get out? The question is, how do I get out, and why do I want to get out? Because of that visceral type war.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is this me?
I think so, but
Okay.
either one of us.
You remember? Okay, so this basically is just kind of summing up and this is kind of repetitive almost. But the traffickers, they, like we said, start off really, really nice. This betrayal trauma a lot of times is really obvious in family systems, but it starts off, a healthy, natural relationship, an attachment bond that seems to be, it should be, if I'm with my father and we're out and he's giving me ice cream, making me, purchasing ice cream, I think that that's a good thing. And that's what dad should do. But then he turns and says, in order for you to get ice cream the next time, you have to do this terrible act. It really, really is a sense of it that creates that sense of betrayal. And so, they will, let's see here, attachments bonds manipulated by traffickers, call other victims and traffickers family and sisters. So then it becomes
Jesaira,
now, yes.
I just want to interrupt you so that
Yeah.
I can stop the chatting in the background. Therese, I think it's you. We can hear you. Okay. I'm so sorry, Jesaira. Go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. But now you're in this family, right? And the traffickers, this new family that you're in, the traffickers now is referring to that as your family as well. And so it's just, it ties into the distorted and perverted perspective on relationships and trauma bonding and betrayal trauma. This, you can understand why it would be difficult to become untangled or disentangled with that.
Mm-hmm.
Disentangled.
Yeah. So obviously this is depressing, heavy stuff. So we want to just invite you to take a breather, feel your feet on the ground, look at these lovely, cute little animals, and just kind of switch your mindset for 1 second. Give yourself a mental break.
Take a nice couple of breaths too.
Nice breaths. Yeah.
Yeah.
Think about which of these is your favorite animal. Mine is the panda.
Panda. You said the panda?
Yeah. Yeah.
I said the panda too.
Oh, there we go. All right, so we're going to move into our next section, so the impact on survivors. And just there, oh, this is me. Okay, so if someone is coming into your office, if you are interacting with anybody, a friend, a student, a coworker, these are some of the red flags that you might be noticing that might suggest that someone is being trafficked, because it is, as we've talked about, so extremely difficult to get out of the trafficking. So I'm not going to read through each of these for the sake of time, and this is certainly not an exhaustive list, but these would just be some of the things to keep your eyes open for. Let's move on.
So what are some of the barriers or some of the things that get in the way to identifying? And this is for clinicians to identify, and this is also for victims to self-identify. What barriers get, what do we see as challenges that get in the way? Some of these include social barriers. For clinicians, the lack of awareness and knowledge. I know for me, once again, I was totally clueless about this issue. And the need for social justice around this issue, the distrust of authority. That's another thing that could keep them from identifying. I'm not sure how long it took for Dr. E's clients to disclose this part of their journey, but if there's a distrust of authority, I can imagine what the challenge was for them to begin to share that experience. Did you ever experience that? Do you think that that's part?
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
and the traffickers know that.
Yeah.
And so the traffickers will put this into the psychological abuse and tell people, if you ever tell anybody, they're not going to believe you. They're going to lock you up. They're going to arrest you for prostitution. They're going to hospitalize you. And so all of those beliefs are already being implanted. And so then when they do get to any kind of authority figure, including therapists, they're very, very sensitive to kind of watching. We'll talk about this on the clinical stuff, watching to see when you're going to turn on them, when you're not going to be safe.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then we're moving into, oh, sorry, Jesaira, this is yours as well.
Oh, no, it's okay. What a trafficking survivor might feel. It's so important not to, for us to be aware of lumping all survivors together and their interpretation of their experience. Everyone is different. Everyone is unique, and each survivor may feel a certain way or not. So some of these that we have listed is maybe dirty and disgusted, have no human value or have no value as a human being, only as a commodity, what I was mentioning earlier, property, commodity, nameless. Wow. I saw a video a couple of weeks back of children being trafficked with, they literally had like codes, barcodes on their neck. That it just, oh, okay. But they may distrust, they may have issues with feeling lovable, and ultimately feeling betrayed by everyone.
And so then from the psychological symptom side, a little bit more clinically, what we're seeing here are what we would call complex trauma reactions. So absolutely, we're going to see PTSD symptoms like the hypervigilance, the numbing, avoidance, things like that. But we're also going to see a much more convoluted collection of very systemic symptoms. So dissociative symptoms is a really common thing. If we think about, being in a situation where we can't fight or flight our way out of it, then we freeze. And part of that then is our ability to dissociate and just go somewhere else in our mind. And if that happens over and over and over again, then that becomes a more familiar coping pattern for us as well. We also see difficulties with memory, attention, which thus then makes it really tough when maybe you're being interviewed by the police and aren't able to give a, from the beginning to the end narrative report. And again, I won't go through all of these problems, but I do want to then bring your attention to this as a way that we organize complex trauma symptoms. So each of these areas, the inability to regulate, the attention and consciousness, the perception of self, perception of others, somatic symptoms, and then worldview and meaning. These are the main areas of complex trauma, and they can manifest differently for each survivor. So you don't want to just be looking at, this is exactly how, changes in attention will look. That could look anything from, I can't remember, to my attention is all over the place. So making sure that you're understanding these concepts, but then open to how they are going to uniquely present for your clients. And I'm trying to pick up the pace a little bit because of time. I want to leave some time for questions. When we talk about what does this mean when we're actually treating somebody, good therapy is grounded in evidence, grounded in solid assessments. Dr. Foster would give me a high five. I don't know if she's here, but shout out to Dr. Foster and the assessments. So there are numerous assessments that we might utilize. These are a few of them. I'm not going to go through each one, but they're all very accessible for you to research further. Whatever treatment approach you're using, whether it's maybe an EMDR, which is a very common evidence-based trauma approach, or a trauma-focused CBT, or expressive and creative art therapy, whatever the treatment modality is, you need to have this approach at your foundation. So we call this the triphasic or the three-stage model. And what you do here is you start off with safety and stabilization, and that's safety for the client from others like traffickers or abusive relationships, but it's also safety from themselves too, because as part of the coping of such a horrific experience, it's not uncommon at all for us to see self-harming, suicide, substance abuse, things that really would impede them from healing, but currently are helping them cope. So we want to assess all symptoms, not just PTSD symptoms. We want to focus on building the therapeutic relationship, building a sense of earning the trust, not just expecting the trust. This is something I talk about with all of my survivors, is I don't expect you to trust me. Trust is built over time, and whatever that time frame needs to be is okay. You know, telling someone you should trust me, I'm your therapist, is a surefire way to get them to not trust you. Also part of the safety and stabilization stage is skill building. You know, so okay, so your coping skills right now might be self-harm, might be substance abuse, might be disordered eating, other things like that, that is somehow benefiting you, but might not be so helpful in the long run. Let's build some other skills that you can have right alongside of those, and ultimately maybe we can strengthen those more helpful skills and help you move into that healthier area. Once you have a sense of stability there, and this is not short, brief therapy. I've spent years with clients on safety and stabilization. But once you have a good, stable foundation, then you can move into processing the traumatic memories. And this is where you need to do it very intentionally, very slowly, and with lots of collaboration. So what I do with this with my clients is we will talk about, okay, next session or in a few sessions, how about, do you feel ready to talk about a memory? Okay, which memory feels manageable? And maybe it's only a part of one memory. And maybe, you know, how are we going to know if we start talking about it and we need to back off? What would be our signal to each other? And so it's very, very deliberate. It's not just, okay, tell me the whole story of your trafficking. And once you tell me, then you'll get relief and you'll feel better. It's just way more complicated than that. And doing that is unsafe because that can re-traumatize, flood, trigger the survivor. We also have to be aware of all of the related themes that come up with the traumatic memories, like the grief, shame, relationship, attachment, all of that stuff is going to be attached to the what happened piece. I don't have time to go into the Basque model, but if anybody wants to talk about that more, I'm happy to share more about that. And then the third stage is the reintegration or restoration stage. Different people call it different things. And this is really when you're starting to look at kind of coming out the other side and like, so who am I now? What do I want my life to look like now? Still a lot of grieving in this part, but you might see your worldview changing, sort of an emergence that happens at this point. And for some people, this part can include some post-traumatic growth. Not for everybody, but that is something that could be part of the experience. All right, continuing with my fast talking here. Common themes in mental health, the survivor is going to be hypervigilant towards the therapist, not just about the trauma, but about therapy and about the therapist as a person. So they're going to be observing us to see, how do I please you? What are the things that I do that you like? Because from their experience, if they learn how to please somebody, that meant they could survive. So they're going to be doing that with us too. How to detect changes in us. So if our mood is off one day, I have clients who can spot if, you know, I got a new tissue box in my room. They'll, you know, it's because they're tuned in. They're that hypervigilance. They can detect all of that because they're looking for danger. Understanding the spectrum of dissociation. We talked about this a little bit, but knowing that dissociation does exist on a spectrum, from daily dissociation to actually we all do. Like did I wash my hair already? Okay, I'm gonna wash it twice. To the more severe end of the spectrum where you might have different dissociated self states. So it's really important that we understand that whole spectrum and understand that that's a protective function that our brain is able to do. And when we are out of danger, that can sometimes become disruptive. And so being able to work with that and talk about it in non-shaming ways, skill-building ways is critical. We've already talked about betrayal trauma, but just be aware that they're waiting for us to betray them too. And for them, it's not if we're going to betray them, it's when. Attachment themes that come up. Think about how they're treating you, how they're feeling towards you. There's very often an experience of you're the best counselor, you're the worst counselor, which sometimes we might be a little too quick to label borderline. It can feel somewhat like that, but that's really the confusion of relational trauma that they've gone through. So we're going to feel some of that too. And also the felt abandonment. I share an example of I try to tell my clients well in advance if I'm going to be going on vacation. And even when that happens, when they get my out of office email, I've had several clients really react strongly and negatively to that, even though we've talked about it moving up to the vacation. So being prepared for some of that and understanding it for what it is. And then also being aware of actual threats, both past and current. So the traffickers have been using this the whole time, and they might still have photos, they might still have videos, they might still have access to the survivor's family. And so knowing that it's not just in their head, if they're saying, yeah, I don't want to talk about this because I'm afraid of what will happen, we can't just say, yeah, but you're safe now. Well, they might not be safe, and even if they are, they might not feel safe. Oh, duplicate.
So basically, Dr. E has said it all. We're just the key here is to create a safe and secure environment as clinicians, create a therapeutic environment that is accepting and validating, that's authentic and honest, that identifies clear and consistent boundaries, similar to what you just alluded to, and persistent, predictable as well.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to just highlight a couple. Oh, is this one? This is you.
No, you can fast forward.
Over. Okay, we've done this. Yeah.
Fast forward.
So let's just, because this presentation does talk about private practice, and what's important for this is knowing that for a lot of trafficking survivors, they don't come to private practice first. They're probably going to be plugged into some kind of agency or law enforcement or victim advocacy piece, and then come to us at a later time in their recovery. However, whenever they're coming to you in your recovery, it's just important that we don't stay in our private practice silo, which private practice clinicians have a tendency to do. Whether that's an ego thing, whether that's just my schedule's too busy, whether that's just the nature of my physical office is all by myself. So it's just critical that we do reach out to our supervision groups to get consultation, to figure out who else is doing this in my area. Who do I need to collaborate with, which we'll talk about here in just a second. Finances, when we think about private practice, we often think like, oh, that sounds nice. I'm gonna, be able to charge a lot and not see too many clients and have a nice little setup for ourselves. Think about what's realistic for trafficking survivors, and think about the power that finances might feel like they hold over them. So being able to navigate what can the survivor reasonably pay, and also understanding that at least all of these survivor clients that I work with, it's very important to them that they do pay, because they don't want that debt bondage feeling again, feeling like they're going to owe me or I'm going to turn on them. So it might be like, okay, how about $10 a session? How about $20? So again, maybe part of the ego, maybe just realizing, do I have the means to do this, but making it financially accessible. And then realizing that there is a real safety issue here for both the client and the counselor. So how do you make sure that you're taking measures to be safe in your office, safe at home, and safe as a person? And then managing the fear and the paranoia that can come with, again, just this awareness that there are dangerous people in the world, that not everybody cares about everybody's well-being. The nice thing about doing this practice in private practice is that, at least for me, I'm not limited to sessions. So a lot of times with insurance, you're limited to maybe 10 sessions. Another way of doing this is through victims compensation, which is a program that will help pay the therapist so that the survivor doesn't have to pay. In private practice, we typically might see the counselor having a smaller caseload than agency work. So ideally, there might be less burnout, less overwhelm. I'm saying ideally because that's not often the case. The counselor gets to choose, like, this is a passion for me, and so I want to have my whole caseload or this part of my caseload being survivors, instead of maybe getting the caseload referred to them through an agency. And then doing long-term work, it's just amazing. And this is what I tell people when they look at me like I'm out of my mind saying, why are you working in this area? It's because we also get to see this last point. We also get to see the amazing resilience, the post-traumatic growth, and just the beauty of humanity alongside with the darkness. Skipping that one. And our final slides, I think, Jesaira, you get to finish us off.
Yeah, just summing up that Dr. E said it. We'll just reiterate it again, that you need assistance as a clinician. You can't do this alone. Case management is a critical piece to this. So what does that look like? It may include housing, medical insurance and treatment, shelters and housing. It's important to step outside of your box, your understanding of things, and begin to work with other team members to best serve this client. That may also include substance abuse treatment. Let's see here. It says, studies found that most victims of human trafficking have been under the influence of drugs and alcohol at some point. You can stand to reason, understand why that seems to be the case, which ultimately then develops into addictions. And then partnering with, police, legal help, FBI, CPS. So it takes a collaborative effort for all clinicians, those in private practice and those who are not.
And these are just some national resources. There's a lot out there. This is just kind of a handful that we've picked. So these will be on our slides. And does anybody have any questions in our 4 minutes that are remaining?
Dr. E, I posed a question in the chat, if you don't mind reading that, just in case there is feedback on my end. I'd rather go mute myself again.
Yeah, let me stop sharing because I can't see anything when I'm sharing. Okay. All right, so what can I do as a future counselor, since we know that a client is thinking it is when we will betray them and not if they will betray them? What can we do to comfort the client? How can we address this fear? And what is the best action a counselor can take? Excellent question. This is really where I go back to showing that I'm trustworthy instead of saying that I'm trustworthy. And to one, understand that that is going to be the case for them, and it's not up to me to tell them to not think that way. There are really good survival reasons why they do think that way, including therapists have betrayed them before too. There are definitely therapists that are involved in the trafficking world on the trafficking side, which is really upsetting. So what I do and what I tell them I'm going to do is I'm just going to work hard to show you that I'm trustworthy. And this is what trust is. It's when somebody does what they say they're going to do over time. So that's what my intention is going to be as we work together. And if there's ever a time, when you have questions for me or you're not sure, maybe about something I've done or I've said, you are welcome to bring that up and you're not going to get in trouble. And, for different clients, we have different kind of reminder phrases like not changing, still me, even if I'm traveling, I'm not leaving, just things like that will, again, reiterate that consistent predictability and trustworthiness. Okay, go ahead.
I had a client once say, Dr. E, about being oddly reliable and consistent. And I think for them, we are oddly reliable and consistent if we're doing this type of work. So I like that.
Yes, that's so important. And I think that's then where even the people in our lives can kind of look at like, well, why can't you just get up and leave on a Friday afternoon for a last minute trip? Well, no, I can't, because I see this client on Fridays, and it's so important that if I am leaving on a trip, that I've told them weeks before, and not just like, hey, I'm sick today, or hey, I can't see you today, or hey, could you move from 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock? Like all of that stuff that might seem like not a big deal to someone who hasn't been through this is a huge deal, because it shows our inconsistency and that we can change on them.
I wanted to ask you about just the conditioning part, and exactly, because I think that's where a lot of it comes from, whether it's the idea of like just being able to walk away. For many of us, we would think, why wouldn't you just be able to get out of that situation? But I guess for me, it's just with the brain, exactly, the neurological aspect of human trafficking, because I think that's where a lot of it is. It's just very mental, I guess, and just what it's like the research and just kind of like what occurs, if you had any idea, because I just think that's just really interesting, that part.
Yeah. There's a lot to that answer. So really briefly, Giovanni, what I will say is it goes back to how we are wired in utero for attachment. And that no matter what kind of person is around us, if they are around us, we are going to attach. And even if we're looking at them and have some awareness of they are not good for me, they're still the person that's there. And that's, our fundamental first order survival tool is attachment. And so it's just so difficult to say, like, okay, so I'm going to be homeless, or maybe the next person out there, at least this person gives me food. The next person out there might kill me, or I might be on the street, or it might be worse. And that's often a message that is perpetuated by the traffickers of, if you leave me, you're not going to have anybody. Nobody's going to love you now. Look at all the things that you've done. You're disgusting. You're a prostitute, all of that stuff. And that does become part of the negative belief system and feeds the attachment. And I know that we have another presentation coming at 5, and I don't want to take any of their time, so we will end there. But always happy to answer any questions or continue talking about this, because this is an area of passion for us. And thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Great presentation.
Great job.
Thank you.
Thank
Everyone,
you.
if you're attending the mindfulness workshop, that is not held in this Blue Jeans room. It is held in Colleen's room, so you'll need to click on the title to get to the workshop.
Thank you.